All right. Oh, there we go. Well, thank you all for being here. Welcome. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Randon Welton. I am the Margaret Clark Morgan Chair of Psychiatry here at the Northeast Ohio Medical University. I want to thank those of you who are joining us here in Rootstown and those who are online, the couple hundred people who are signed up. It is fantastic to have you all with us for this afternoon. And I want to welcome you to the 6th annual Doctors Fred and Penny Frese Lecture. I want to welcome you on behalf of the PEGS Foundation, Northeast Ohio Medical University, the Department of Psychiatry, and our coordinating centers of excellence. This lecture series was created several years ago. Actually, my predecessor who helped create it is here, Dr. Mark Munitz. And they created it with the Frese and with the PEGS Foundation to allow individuals who have faced serious mental illness in their own lives or in the lives of loved ones to have an opportunity to share their journey. In the past, we have heard from folks who have, faced and overcome barriers, who have confronted stigma, advocated for treatment, and paved the way for others to receive better care and to live better lives. These lectures were inspired by the vision of Dr. Fred Frese to help people with serious mental illness live full and meaningful lives, or as he said, to assist individuals who are in recovery from these serious mental illnesses to be able to reintegrate back into society and to not be ashamed of their disorders. NeoMed's Department of Psychiatry and the PEGS Foundation share Dr. Fred Frese's vision, and the department aspires to be a model for disseminating a continuum of integrated treatment care to promote recovery and improve the lives of those suffering from severe mental illness, schizophrenia, and others. For those of you who may not be aware of the Department of Psychiatry here at NeoMed, we have 3 coordinating centers of excellence within the department. And all 3 of these work with our community partners to disseminate best mental health treatment practices in a variety of community mental health and community settings. We have our Criminal Justice Coordinating Center of Excellence, which works with Ohio communities to forge collaborations between the mental health and the criminal justice system in order to engage individuals with mental illness into treatment and into diversion and deflection programs. The Substance Use Deflection Initiative is the newest program within that center, and it partners with quick response teams across the state and also the Ohio Deflection Association to provide consultation and technical training and assistance to build a network that engages in best practices and pre-arrest diversion for those who have had overdoses, specifically opiate overdoses, and to engage them and their family in treatment and support. We have the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health, which promotes a comprehensive approach to promoting wellness, identifying illness, treating illness, decreasing the risk of suicide, and optimizing academic success at colleges and universities across the state of Ohio. And we have the Best Practices in Schizophrenia Treatment Center, or our BEST Center, which provides training, consultation, program evaluation, advocacy, and public education to accelerate the dissemination and use of evidence-based and promising practices of schizophrenia treatment and recovery. These centers of excellence cannot do the work on their own, no matter how hard they work. They collaborate with individuals with lived experiences, with families, with their friends, of folks with severe and serious mental illness, as well as numerous other similarly minded organizations across the state. Primarily PEGS Foundation, the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, NAMI Ohio, and their many affiliates. And we're delighted that so many representatives of those organizations are here in the audience in person and are online watching this event. In order to introduce our speaker, I would like to welcome Victoria Ramonda, the Chief of Staff of the PEGS Foundation. Victoria.
Hi, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much. I'm a very loud talker, so I'm going to try to hold the mic down a little bit. If I get too loud, put your hands to your ears and I'll quiet. So thank you, Randy. Just to make a connection, so Dr. Welton's title, the Margaret Clark Morgan Chair, is PEGS Foundation. We changed our name back in 2018. And so PEGS Foundation is the same. It was the Margaret Clark Morgan Foundation, and our founder, Peg Morgan, would be so proud of the work that's happening here at NeoMed. So thank you very much to everybody. PEGS Foundation and NeoMed, the Coordinating Centers of Excellence, created this lecture series back in 2018 to honor the late Dr. Fred Frese and his wife, Penny Frese. And I am here today representing PEGS Foundation, and on behalf of our Board of Trustees, our President and CEO, Rick Keller, and my fellow staff members, it's my pleasure and greatest honor to speak about Dr. Fred Frese and his wife, Penny. Penny was a member of our board for 20 years, and I am doubly blessed to also have her as one of my dearest friends for over 30 years. I like to remind everyone at the foundation that I've known her the longest. So Penny is with her daughter Claire in Seattle, and they're watching us virtually. And for all of us here in person, I am warmly welcoming them. So Penny and Fred have been married for 40 years, and she worked by his side to see that people with mental illness were not defined by their diagnosis. Fred and Penny's love for each other and their family were the cornerstones that impacted the course of schizophrenia treatment and advocacy forever. It's important that we hear from people like them and their journey of living with schizophrenia and how support from family members can make a difference and how mental illness is perceived. We learn from their stories of hope, advocacy, and recovery. So thank you. Fred Frese's influence extended globally with over 2,000 speaking engagements on serious mental illness spanning 48 states, as well as Canada, Japan, Australia, and Europe. Today, we are honored to have participants from 18 states. Yesterday, it was 16, today it's 18. That's awesome in our virtual audience, and it speaks to the impact that Fred has had on the lives of people. And he has always been an advocate and a philosopher of mental health. Today, we have 10 counties represented, 10 counties from Ohio. So welcome to all of you. Fred taught medical students here at NeoMed about his lived experience with schizophrenia many years ago. And the NeoMed students and graduates refer to his lecture as one of the very best and certainly one of the most memorable of their medical education. Fred was able to change people's perceptions about people living with schizophrenia and other serious mental disorders by being an example of the ways in which people affected by that disorder can lead meaningful, independent lives in the community. PEGS Foundation and the NeoMed Coordinating Centers of Excellence are proud to honor the legacy of Dr. Fred Frese and Dr. Penny Frese through this annual lecture series. This initiative brings remarkable individuals like Fred, who is resilient and successfully lived with a serious mental illness, or like Penny, who provided unwavering support to their family members to inspire us with their stories of hope and recovery. Dr. Frese's personal book collection was generously donated to NeoMed's medical library, and today, for those attending in person, there's a display of some of those books outside the auditorium. In these books, you will see Fred's handwritten notes and thoughts capturing the facts and highlights in the research that he found to be most significant. Be sure to check this out before you go. The complete collection of these books will be on display in the library for future learners and professors to gain their own insights. Now, let me introduce today's Dr. Fred and Penny Frese lecturer, Nathan Shuherk. Nathan has made his mark on the social media world as an influencer, doing nonfiction book reviews. His 167,000 followers on TikTok, known as Book Talk, and 136,000 followers on Instagram tune in to see Nathan and hear his thoughts on the books that he's read, what he's currently reading, and his top book picks for avid readers. He's also a disability advocate for all people who live with an illness and who find themselves facing barriers due to it. And in addition to their illness, Nathan is open and transparent and always willing to talk. He talks about his illness, and he wants to shift the narrative of how we talk about schizophrenia and the limitations that are placed on people. May this lecture inspire you as you care and support others who struggle every day to regain their lives as something overwhelming as schizophrenia. So now, Nathan Shuherk.
Okay, I just want to prepare you all that I have prepared one of the worst slideshows that you will probably ever see. I am kind of calling this speech The Reality of Schizophrenia, but I think a subtitle would be A Portrait of Schizophrenia, and you'll see why. Hi, my name is Nathan Shuherk, and I review nonfiction books on social media under the username Schizophrenic Reads. I have 175,000 followers on TikTok and 135,000 on Instagram. I'm not saying this to brag. This is just the email that I have to send every publicity department at every publisher. And so this is basically just copy and pasted from my notes app, so I don't have to keep writing it over and over again. If you're curious what type of books that I tend to review, they're not all mental health related. They are a collection of really different things. These are the last 3 books that I have asked publishers to send me. These are books that I'd love to talk about. Big fiction. It's kind of a history of how conglomerations have kind of slowly ruined the publishing landscape and how, going to a bookstore, maybe all you see is romance now, which isn't the worst thing, but maybe isn't the best thing. We also have The Weight of Nature. This is about neuroscience and climate change and kind of some research into this subject. It is niche. I expect to get very few listeners to those videos, but something I am way too excited to talk about. And Queer Country. I have recently fallen in love with artists like Zach Bryan, Tyler Childers, and have just been exploring the history of country music so much that I thought I needed a book published by the University of Chicago about it. So what I read is pretty diverse. It's kind of off the wall, and it's just not super consistent, and I love it. So how did I become a book influencer? I think that's kind of where this talk will kind of go, but it is, as you can see by the slideshow, it is not because I am artistically gifted. It's because my partner and my friends would just be how they would describe me as a yapper. I don't mind getting on my phone and just saying some things, sharing some thoughts, giving some insights into what I've read and some of the politics surrounding it. And so that's kind of how I build a platform, is just talking to my phone in my own apartment. And it's been a really quiet time that has also had a lot of comment sections, just some wild things said. If you're wondering if I've always been a reader, this is one of the most common questions that has asked to me. As you can see, yes, it's just always been a thing. My parents, from the time I was in first grade, started bribing me with books. That was like, if you are good, you behave well at school, we'll take you to a bookstore. So the first books that I ever fell in love with were Magic Tree House. And it was no surprise to my parents when, after about 7 major changes in college, I finally landed on history. That way I could just spend my entire college years reading books. And that was the best thing that could happen to me. I had always just loved reading. I was one of those kind of slightly pretentious 14-year-olds that was recommending Dostoevsky to people. And you're like, that's not a fun person. You're right, that's totally fair. But that's just who I was. That's always kind of been the type of person that I am. In high school, I went through a lot of bad haircuts. And probably the biggest thing about my high school years is when at 14, depression started for me. It came on quite viciously to a thing in which now my family talks about this almost entire personality change that happened to me in between the summers of middle school to high school, that I just became an increasingly introverted person. I withdrew into myself. I felt more comfortable reading books than being around people. I kind of lost the ability to maintain and sustain the normal relationships that you have during high school. And the high school that I went to, I had 40 kids in my class. Most of us had been there since pre-K. These were people that I spent every day of my life with for 18 years. And it came to a kind of unremarkable end that I just distanced myself so much that kind of by the end of high school, even though I was in plays and musicals, I was part of a band where I played violin at one point. It's all, there's just too much happening. Highly active, but from the time I was 14, I started taking medication. I was in therapy. I had a psychiatrist. And so my mental health was basically closely monitored as just a young kid. And that continued on. And if you don't believe me, my senior photos were me in a leather jacket in a cemetery in my hometown. And I don't know if that doesn't scream just like depressed kid from the Midwest, then like, I don't know that anything else will convince you. In college, things kind of rapidly deteriorated for me. I continued on with my slightly antisocial streak. And the photo that you're seeing of me laying in a hospital bed was the very first photo that I took with like my main group of friends in college. That was the first photo that we ever had together. And it was as a result of what I thought at the time was a heart attack, which was just a panic attack that happened because I was sitting in class and I heard a chair push back, and then I heard it again and again and again, and repeated for hours and hours until I thought I was having a stroke. I thought I was having a heart attack. And I went to the hospital, and they just assumed that I was seeking drugs of some sort. And no result came of that. But in the January semester of my freshman year of college, I was taking an abnormal psychology class, and we were covering schizophrenia in like a 2-day lecture series spanning about 8 hours of lectures. And I was doing the reading for the class and sitting in the class, and I just could not shake the feeling that something was dearly and sorely personal about what I was reading. And I went to my psychology professor after spending about 4 hours sitting in the snow outside on a bench listening to music, trying to digest what could possibly be happening to me. But a series of interventions, small interventions with my friends for years led me to believe that, or for the last year of my life, it led me to believe that I needed to talk to some people. And so I did. And because I was lucky enough to have a basically continuous level of care from the time I was 14, that I had people monitoring me, that I had people closely watching my mental health, I was able to very quickly get diagnosed with schizophrenia, and treatment basically began almost instantly. And all I wanted during this time period was to just be a normal college student. I wanted to sit in a library and read history books and philosophy books and talk to my friends and go watch movies. But college became this spiral where no moment seemed to have any sense of stability. And that was just how life was for the 4 years of college. I never felt myself. I never felt like any sense of gaining momentum in life. I just didn't know what was happening to me. And so for college, those years, I went through these kind of vicious cycles where I would get on medication and I would gain weight and I would hate my body, and then I would get off medication, and then I knew I needed some source of stability. So I would start drinking, and I developed, I think, a form of highly voluntary alcoholism during college that was a result of trying desperately to seek some source of comfort in my life. And this is not a promotion of smoking, but my college years were mostly me going out into the woods or leaving campus to just smoke cigarettes, drink beer, and be alone. That is not to say I did not have friends or did not make relationships, but that the greatest portion of my memory of these years was basically my brain clawing at me to get away from people, to escape what was happening inside my own head, and to retreat and not let people in, not let people know what was happening to me. And so it just became this thing where the greatest thing that I found for helping me be able to study for the next class or be able to do well on the next test was distancing myself from people, is getting away, chain smoking, drinking, doing all the things that, I think a fun college experience tends to happen. But for me, it was just the only thing that I could do to function. After college, I was hospitalized shortly after college, and there was a sense of I was directionless. I didn't know what I was doing. And so these 3 photos span 3 years of my life. This was the photo with my sister, is taken right after college. And then for the next 3 years, I had a series of, I think, 15 jobs that I worked for an average of 1 week before getting fired. I started and dropped out of multiple grad schools. I started and dropped out of multiple relationships. I had no sense of stability. And yet, the greatest thing that happened in this time period of my life was finding a therapist and hiding away in my condo where I lived alone. If you want a movie recommendation or a TV show recommendation from like 2017 to 2018, I watched just about everything. I can give you some insight into what that was. But really, this was a point in my life where I wasn't leaving the house. I wasn't getting out to do hardly anything. And medication, I was taking medication that when you talk to people with schizophrenia, one of the most recurring things that they will talk about when it comes to taking antipsychotic medication is how much it slows them down. Sometimes it slows their brain down, sometimes it slows their body down. And for me, it seemed to slow down my intelligence. I couldn't read, I couldn't focus. I would have conversations with friends just over text message, and after 2 or 3 exchanges, I couldn't think of a thing to say. I was just incapable of maintaining my friendships. There was just nothing that, I don't know, inspired me. I don't know. I was lucky that I really loved watching TV shows and YouTube and listening to music. The only thing that I looked forward to in that basic whole time period was Thursdays when new movies would come out and Fridays when new music would come out. And that was how I arranged my entire life, was just looking forward to the next week so I could consume some new form of media. My therapist slowly began using some forms of exposure therapy, CBT, and so many other things that we just kind of made it these steady goals to try and like reacclimate to society, reacclimate to conversations with friends, reacclimate to spending time around my family, and slowly but surely finding a way to use time as something that could eventually help me. And so I started going on short little walks by myself. I did, well, maybe was one of the best things that I could do was slowly asking my friends that I had made for help. Sometimes they would come over and hang out with me and watch a TV show while we did laundry together, or sometimes they would help me make a meal that was slightly healthier than my, very frequent McDonald's trips. And so I kind of tried to function, and I kept failing, and I kept asking for help, and I kept being drawn back to just these little bursts of things that me and my therapist work on, things that I would work on with my parents and my friends. And things started to improve. During this time period, I started doing some online advocacy, joining chat groups, getting connected with other advocates. And also during this, when I was putting together this presentation, putting together this slideshow, I just went through all my photos and thinking of the stories, thinking of who I was at those points in time. And that photo of me laying in bed, that was like for about a 2-year span. That was, I would say, about 20% of my photos. His friends asked me like, "How you doing?" Like, here's just me laying in bed. And I don't know. I still take daily naps, but I am not spending, 14 hours a day just kind of laying there. And I think time has been just a great provider to get me back into life. So I started public speaking. I did events where I talked about my suicide attempts. I did events where I talked about the mental health care system. Did events where I talked about how important it was to talk to your friends and family about your mental health. And I did events where I talked about the stigma that people like me with schizophrenia face in online places and in person. I told many stories that resonated with people, and I slowly thought this might be a career trajectory for me. as grad school and a normal working life had kind of failed and fizzled out many ways, in many different ways, I thought this was going to be how I would spend my time. And around the same time period, my therapist thought that one of the uh, best things that I could do was switch medication and try and start reading again. I'd spent years in therapy complaining about how little I could concentrate. And so she made me set a goal for myself of just, let's read 10 books a year. You can take it slow, you can read whatever you want. It doesn't matter the reading level, it doesn't matter anything. And I just slowly picked it up. I built reading into my life as kind of this daily thing that it was, instead of keeping a mental health journal like I had done so long in the past, it had been kind of a journal of my own reading. If I could read 20 pages in a day, I knew I was doing fairly well. If I could read 50 pages a day, I knew I was having a great day. And if I could read no pages for a full week, I knew I probably needed to ask one of my friends for a little bit of help. So I got connected with several different nonprofits. I traveled around telling parts of my story, talking about mental health care, and the reading went from 20 books to about 100 books a year. And I continuously found myself drawn back into kind of who I had been in high school, someone that mostly enjoyed spending time with books, someone that still had a tough time being around people, and slowly was like working myself into trying to talk about advocacy as best I could and as in depth. And so I read books on the subject. I read books on the history of mental health. I read books, anything that I could find about telling a story of how to structure stories. And I really, really enjoyed what I was doing. And then this is two photos from the first week of March in 2020. I was in New York City doing a fundraiser gala event for people with schizophrenia where we would tell our stories and we would talk. And I was staying in a hotel just down from Wall Street. And every morning I would walk by Wall Street and just the red ticker, just the economy collapsing around the world. And you could see what was happening and you could feel the tensions rising. And I went to go give a speech on the last night of my trip, in which it was going to be videotaped and televised for PBS, in which they would show a documentary. And I give a speech about the absolute necessity that we find a way as a country, as a community, to inspire the government to provide universal healthcare. This was, I thought, at the moment, the most important and impactful thing that I could talk about through an audience, to a public, to people watching. And when I left the stage, I was pulled aside by a couple of people from the film crew and a couple of people from the organizations that I had been working with to let me know that they did not appreciate the political contents of what I was saying. What I was saying was the world is on the precipice of collapse and we need to make sure that we are caring for each other. That's what I had thought. And what they had thought was that I was trying to push politics. So we left New York City and I went on a vacation with my partner. We went to Pittsburgh and we were there the day kind of the American experience collapsed. We walked out of a wedding and we had a couple hours to kill in between the wedding and the party, and college campuses were emptying, every store was shuttering, and we knew that things were different. That from that moment that we walked out of that wedding of one of my best friends, that like whatever was happening in the future was different than what had happened before we walked into that wedding. So I spent the next few months doing online advocacy. I was giving speeches to medical schools, to nursing schools, giving my insight and my thought about living with schizophrenia, some of the things that I've seen in the system, some that I've seen in my own interactions with healthcare providers. And we were also trying to use the time off to do a little bit of traveling. So you can see this is Mothman's butt. We went to West Virginia. We tried to take car trips around the Midwest. One of our favorite activities was leaving the city of Indianapolis to go find the best cornfield to watch the stars in. And so we just tried to do whatever we could to just have some bit of stability. And this is probably the moment of my life that is like the most obvious lesson that I have learned, that time and relaxation has been the most prominent points of which my health is actually being taken care of. That I could learn how to cope, how to function, how to be around people, as long as I knew how to use time. As long as I had time at my advantage, I was much more capable than I had ever anticipated. I continued reading. We had a year of doing next to nothing, of giving occasional internet speeches on Zoom. And so I just kept reading. I kept reading. And it slowly became a place where the politics of talking about mental health and watching the world shift in so many different directions, of being inspired by conspiracy theories, of having this perfect moment in history in which to enact something like universal healthcare, of which we could find ways to take care of each other as a community. And it seemed like all that was happening was a further push into extremist kind of political rhetoric that was taking up all of the airspace. And I continued reading, and I kind of dropped being a mental health advocate for a while. I decided that what I wanted was to talk about books. And in this space, I found that I was able to have all of the political conversations that I wanted. I was able to bring up the things that I found important. I was able to bring up the things that I thought mattered. And what I had found in advocacy in a somewhat repetitious fashion was that advocacy so often is surrounded specifically by the funding of pharmaceutical companies that do not want anything more radical than take your meds. And I did not think this was the solution to how to care for each other, how to improve health outcomes, and mostly how to just feel better. And so I kind of left advocacy in some sense. I took the name Schizophrenic Reads online. This was kind of a little bit of a joke to myself because colloquially, schizophrenia typically just means like divided or chaotic. And I just picked up random book after random book. I would switch between science and memoir and essays and histories. And I thought it would just be funny to just say, that's what it was. But slowly over time, I kept getting drawn back into talking about mental health, talking about books that talked about mental health, talking about my own story, and specifically talking about my relationship to the disability system. When I got on disability, when I was, I think, 26, my monthly income was $720. With that, I was also given $18 in food stamps. And because I had used the generosity of my parents to find a place of living, I thought maybe I should make it on my own. Maybe I should look into public housing. And when I went to look into it and to try and register, I found that the wait list in Indianapolis was 6.5 years. These are not only impossible funds to live on, they are impossible funds to find any sense of happiness, to find any sense of community. And I knew that during my time in seeking disability, that I had all of the medical documentation that I ever needed to get disability. I'd been in the mental health care system since I was 14, and yet I went through a 2.5-year-long process to get on disability. I had to hire a lawyer, and 25% of my benefits of the back pay were taken by lawyers' fees. And I grew disenchanted because I thought a lot of the conversations that we had about schizophrenia focused primarily on how we use language. Should we say crazy, or can you call someone a schizophrenic? Kind of these journalistic representations of how we conceive of schizophrenia. And so I realized that I could be a little bit more radical. I could say the things that I wanted to if I just got online. And so I just pushed myself further and further with creating content, of sharing my thoughts, of trying to form a sense of community out of other disability activists, and disability justice people, and I felt more at home than I ever had. During this time period, it wasn't all just 10-minute lectures on why I think universal healthcare is one of the only essential things. I also did little jokey things, like this is a snapshot of a video where I talk about hypernormalization, which is a psychological phenomenon during a falling society. And I talked about the fall of the USSR and its parallels to the United States. And what was playing in the background was Taylor Swift's lyrics. So it wasn't all the most serious content, but I did try and use whatever platform that I had built, whatever audience that I could direct into thinking of disability as a progressive topic and thinking of it as a political issue. A couple years ago, I read this book, Sitting Pretty. Sorry, it's a little blurry from here. Basically, this is a memoir of conceptualizing disability as a political issue through the lens of of living a disabled life. This is a memoir that is highly accessible, that anyone could read and understand the topics that are being talked about. And it really drove me to say, I want to write that book. I want to use my stories. I want to use my experiences. I want to use my reading to talk about my story in very much the same capacity that Rebecca Taussig did. And so I've continued reading. I have now continued to make this a huge part of my life, where I have started book clubs. I have joined in reading groups. I have just kind of pushed the idea of literacy as kind of a radicalizing force for people to join in their local communities, join book clubs, find groups of readers, talk about these issues, because I think they are incredibly important and vital. And so I've started a book club in Indianapolis. I've started one online, and this has been some of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I have found this platform that ultimately, I want to say that the two most important things to finding my sense of who I am as a person, how I feel well and adjusted in my life as a schizophrenic, as a person, as a friend, as a partner, has been that I have had two resources that often set me apart from most other people. I have had the luxury of my parents' money to be able to afford housing, to be able to afford food, and never have to worry about where my next meal is going to come from or worry about evictions. This has provided me with the time that I have had in order to take care of my mental health, in order to figure out how to deal with hallucinations in a social environment, to figure out how to talk to my therapist about some of the delusional thinking that I'm having, and how to, more than anything, take care of all of the negative symptoms of schizophrenia that often get overlooked and that do not have a great recourse for treatment. Things like doing your laundry, of showering regularly, of getting exercise, of taking care of your mind and your body are incredibly important, and that outside of community health practices that are often overlooked. A lot of the times for people with schizophrenia, one of the only solutions that some systems have is to take medication, and that's kind of the end of the story. As long as you take medication, maybe things will work out. But I've had time away from everything. I've had time to dissect and digest my own stresses, and I've had time to sit with my thoughts and arrange them and organize them. And if you know anything about schizophrenia, that's not the easiest thing to accomplish. And it's because of the time and the privileges that I've had that I can get online and talk about these things and get in front of you and talk about these things. And I have found such a comfort out of using this little weird special interest of mine that is just sitting and reading in order to have conversations with people that I find to be incredibly important. I wanted to do the thing that I'm known for, the thing that I do, and I wanted to give you some book recommendations. For doctors and medical students, these three books are three histories of the medical system, of injustices that have happened in the medical system, of approaches to conceptualizing how medical systems can better care for people if we view them more as complete people and less as kind of the products of just simply trying to make medical care as simplistic as possible. And for everyone else, I want to leave you with three books that I think are important. The Myth of Normal is a re-articulation of how we conceptualize trauma, of how we conceptualize how trauma leads to illnesses and how we can reassess the very human and normal elements of living with an illness. Sickening is a great look specifically at type 2 diabetes, which I didn't get into my story, which is something I also developed over the course of taking many medications and being very inactive. This is a great look at the systems in place and how one of the most effective forms of treating people is forms of communal care that we often have underdeveloped as a country. And Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond, Pulitzer winner, is a look at the industry of the disability system. I have been intimately aware with the disability system. I could have very well given an entire lecture just on the disability system, but one of the things that even this book misses out on is a little thing that I want to mention is the marriage penalty. Me and my partner have been together for 5 years. We have a great relationship. Most importantly, I think we have 3 cats. It's just a very quiet home, except for the occasional cat fight. And because I'm on disability, we are not allowed to get married. Legally, if we get married, I lose my health insurance and I lose all sources of income. These are the types of systemic injustices that people with disabilities face regularly. These are the type of injustices that most people are not familiar with. And when it comes to the disability system, the types of conversations that we are having as like a mass culture are often from a point of ignorance, because we used basically just the rhetorical talking points of scapegoating, actually talking about justice and what it looks like. So thank you all for listening to me talk about how much I like books. And I hope some of these recommendations will serve you well over the years. And thank you so much for listening to this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nathan. We're going to take a few minutes. We have a question and answer sessions, and there's microphones that are set up in the aisles. And I believe if you're online, you can add your questions into the chat feature, and Nathan can address some of those. So does anybody have a question that they want to start out with? Because I have a few. Yes. I can come up there, but you'll probably get there faster than I will.
Okay. So for all the books that you read, and knowing recently you posted online that you guys just moved, how do you decide which books that you keep and which books that you like do something else with?
Yeah, I think we went through this whole process of weeding out my bookshelves. We have probably 1,500 books, and before we moved, we got rid of about 200 of them. I think it's books that I don't have a fondness for that I've already read, and also books that, because I get sent 3 to 5 books per week, there's just books that I know I'm probably never going to get to. And if a book is sat on my shelf for about 2 years, it's not likely that I'm ever going to pick it up. And so it is with a heavy heart that I can't keep infinitely expanding the library, and those books just, they need a new home, because I will not give them the attention that they are due.
We have another question.
Oh, there it goes. Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It was really inspirational for somebody with a disability, as you said, to be able to achieve what you have. So I know it's kind of a landmark for somebody in YouTube to achieve more than 100,000 followers. I was just wondering what kind of an experience that was for you.
It's slightly anticlimactic. I think the thing that you learn when you're trying to grow a platform is that it can't grow to a number that is ultimately satisfying. And I think what I found is that I needed to draw the satisfaction not from how many followers that I can accrue over this time, but in the relationships that I find with my fellow creators and the relationships that I build with readers in my audience and with readers out in my local community. Is that, you know, I can have this own self frustration that I haven't hit 300,000 on TikTok, but as soon as I hit that, I'll have the frustration that I haven't hit 500,000. And so instead of the obsession, I suppose, with a certain number or a certain metric that you think endorses some level of success, it's just make the goals of your online content creation, more about the relationships that you're building and the goals that you have outside of it, because I think ultimately that's the only way to like make being an internet creator sustainable.
Thank you. I think Dr. Welton
Yeah.
has a question?
Yeah, again, thank you for the talk. It's very impressive and your courage is really admirable. We are in a medical school, so, and we have medical students here and we have medical students watching. You were involved in medical care and mental health care and general medical care, since you were 14, as you identified. What was the most helpful attitude that medical providers could have? And then what were some of the unhelpful attitudes that you experienced? Not naming names, obviously, but and not talking about treatment decisions or names of medicines or anything, but just the general attitude of the providers dealing with you as an individual and as a person.
Yeah.
What was helpful? What was maybe not so helpful?
I think there is often a tendency, specifically with schizophrenia, but also there's a whole list of illnesses out there, but of kind of treating a patient as if their autonomy and their own decision making is negligible in the process, and becoming my own like self advocate in these environments. But then also sticking up for some of the things that I have found to be highly important. One of the things that I have talked about, and I wish I would have gotten into in my speech, was something that I have found when it comes to taking antipsychotic medication is the medication that has taken almost everything from me has become almost unbearable. I can live each day, but there's no joy out of life. And so I've found a medication that still allows me to hallucinate, and it doesn't take away my joy of having conversations with friends, of reading books. And for a lot of people, specifically with schizophrenia, one of the most important things that the medical system that we have as interaction with medical system is just asking what those levels are of like the psychotic symptoms. And for me, there's no better functioning that I've had, not only as just like what I can do with my day, but also just how I feel as a person than when I've had some psychotic symptoms. And I think that's very counterintuitive to a lot of medical professionals that I've interacted with, not only nurses, but doctors, psychiatrists, and they've always just wanted to do whatever they can to take those away. And I think because, like I said, I've had the time to understand myself, to perform every bit of reality testing and make that kind of an adaptive part of who I am and how I function every single day. It's a thing that, while I still experience, it's left me with what's left of myself in order to feel good, to feel happy, to feel satisfied. And it's a hard thing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we go on to another question from our audience here live, we do have a couple of questions from our virtual audience. Do you have any suggestions for people being in a relationship with a person who has schizophrenia? What kind of things they should say or do?
I think I think one of the most challenging parts of that I found during my dating years was like how to bring up the conversation. It's like how to how to let people down easy or something. And I think for me, I just found like bringing it up early was like the most important thing. So when you're dating, it's just like kind of let the conversation be one of the leading points, because if a person has hesitancies or does not want to be in your life because of your diagnosis, and this is any diagnosis, then you don't want that person in your life. Them being in your life will actively derail whatever you are trying to accomplish. And so I kind of lead with that. I kind of lead with schizophrenia, and I've taken it on as a username, because if someone is dissatisfied with that part of me, they're going to be dissatisfied with the whole of me. And the best thing that you can do is just have an open line of communication with your partner or partners or your family members, of trying to take away the shame that is almost inherent to this illness, and let it be a point of conversation and of openness. And in my experiences, the relationships will only like become more personal, become more compassionate, and become more interesting.
Thank you. We have another question from Jenna. As a therapist working with first episode psychosis, what are the two most influential books that would be food for them and their client?
One of the books that I've recommended time and time again is this book called Inferno by Catherine Cho. And this isn't specifically about schizophrenia. This is specifically about postpartum psychosis. And I think one of the most illuminating things about this is not only talking about postpartum psychosis as a medical condition in which is incredibly stigmatized, but it's also a medical condition in which the transitionary period between what you say normal to being psychotic, it's such this profoundly shifting thing in a person. And I think that would be one of the most helpful things because you can read the personal experiences of someone going through that transitionary period. And I think getting a first person perspective on these issues is really important because there are so many intricacies and intimate things about living with psychosis or living with schizophrenia that I think really can only shine through in memoirs and people that talk about their own experiences.
Thank you very much. We have another question from our audience here.
There we go. Covered it earlier. How many books have you read?
Oh, total? I have no idea. I started using Goodreads 5 years ago and my number's 750, but I average about 145 books a year at this pace.
And my other question, because I live in a community where we have a recovery center, and I'm just curious how you stay healthy. I know you mentioned your daily nap and treatment, but what other tools do you use to avoid a relapse?
When doctors tell you to go on a little mental health walk, they're being serious. I found walking to be one of like the most restorative things for me. Having a quiet and calm habit and hobby like reading has just built in so much stability into my life, and getting out for little walks of trying to do forest bathing while living in a city of 1 million people, just spending time outside around trees quietly. And it's just, it's something that, because I think I've been so fortunate to have all the time that I need to do, it's been something that I can go on 3 or 4 mile walks when my brain is a little fuzzy or a little cloudy, or there's a little too many thoughts jumping around. And so I think walking is one of those things that I wish either more people had time to do or more people had access to good walking trails, because I think it's one of the best things that you can add into your life. And yeah, it's been a real joy for the last 1.5 years of my life.
Okay, we're going to wrap up the questions, but I'm going to go last.
Okay.
I understand that you've made it very clear that you have cats that live with you.
Yeah.
And I understand that they have unique names. So can you share the names of your cats, please? I'm a fellow cat lover.
Oh yeah, we have a black cat named Baggio. He was in one of the photos, but it's a black cat, so you really couldn't tell that he was in the photo. Baggio is named after an Italian goalkeeper. Why? No one knows. Ilyich is our second cat. He is a brown tabby, and he is named after Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. I have a fondness for State and Revolution by Lenin, so that's how he got his name. And Maeve is our little weird girl, the third one to join our house. And why we named her Maeve? Nothing else fit. Yeah, she's just a little weirdo. She's got kind of wonky eyes, and she's great. We've really grown to love her, but we've had her for about 1 year, and we have no idea how to describe her. She's a complete enigma.
Thank you for that. And then I do have a question about your book. When is it going to be published?
I am in the stage of selling my book, and once I sell my book, then I'll have 1 year to finish writing it. And I am hopeful that probably by the summer of 2026 that there will be a book out. It's a long process, and I'm going the route of traditionally publishing this book. That way I can have a good editing team and those types of things. So the book will be, aligned with some of the things that you heard today and go more into depth. I really want to make it as creative a project as I can and bring in more of the inspirations that I've had in my readings. So I'm hopeful that some publisher will want to publish me, but I guess we'll see.
Well, we'll stay tuned. And I do want to make another comment that for those of you who are here in the audience and for those online, the books that Nathan recommends will be sent out to everybody who participated today. So thank you for that. And then Nathan, if you could, I want to share a slide with you for anybody that is looking for help. Wait for it. The Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services has mha.ohio.gov. Get help early. If you have the QR code readers, you can use that. It's a wonderful resource for people that are looking for help. And then I would like to welcome Dr. Munetz to come down. Dr. Munetz is the former Margaret Clark Morgan Chair. And he is going to help present an award to Nathan from the university. You want to say something?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay.
I just wanted to, hold on. I wanted to thank Nathan for this wonderful presentation today. I know he has used humor, and I think humor has probably, as it has in my life, really helped keep him resilient. So Nathan, again, thank you very much for your presentation today. For anybody that would like to come and say hello, he's here. He can answer questions if you're here in person. And then please do check out Dr. Fred Frese's the books out on display in the lobby.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Great job. I appreciate it.